Welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. In today's video, we're going to be analyzing the 2024 presidential election and take a look at a hypothetical scenario that is becoming more and more likely as President Trump has lost this re-election bid in 2020, and we look towards the political future of Donald Trump as well as the restructuring of the Democratic Party post the Obama-Biden era. So before we get started, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. So let's get started. So for this election scenario, we're going to be taking a look at a matchup between President Donald Trump and Vice-President Elect at this time, Kamala Harris, who is expected to serve a full term as Vice President, considering that Joe Biden himself is fine all throughout his term. Again, there's possibilities of many things happening during the presidency. However, we're going to assume that Kamala Harris will be the vice president at the time, and Donald Trump would have been out of office for over 4 years at this point in time. So, with this scenario, it becomes very interesting, a little bit of the backstory, and we could be here forever, but I think if we take a look at current political trends in the sense of what is currently happening, and realistically, what is going to be covered by the mainstream media, because if we see anything at this point in time, with this election and many elections in the past, the most consequential thing to an election is mainstream media coverage, what they choose to cover. In 2016, they decided to cover Hillary Clinton's email scandals to a point that really lost her the election. In this case, in 2020, we saw how they covered Donald Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic and how that really affected Donald Trump's campaign. So if we take a look at what could happen by then, I would say that there's two things that could affect. I'm going to say one thing for each side. First, for Donald Trump's side, I think we're probably going to see a lot of post-administration investigations, and essentially they're probably going to carry a narrative of Donald Trump is crazy because he went through all of this voter fraud claims, which again, that is disputed, but overall there has been very little to no evidence showing widespread voter fraud enough to overturn the election. So that's going to be a first thing. It's probably going to stay with Donald Trump and his legacy as president. Now, with Kamala Harris, the biggest thing that could really affect her is the losing of the moderate suburban voter. So if we just analyze the facts, the Democratic Party is currently facing an identity crisis. They really don't have a set image of where they can really look at. They're really kind of struggling between the progressive, the extremely progressive faction of their party and the moderate/conservative faction of the party. Those voters might be lost in the process. And if with Kamala Harris becoming more bigger influential, even leading the ticket, that's going to be the most liberal Democratic ticket in a long time. I would say since FDR. And it's going to be something that's going to be very interesting to see, as she has been rated by nonpartisan organizations like GovTrack as the most liberal senator during her time in the Senate. And with some of the policies that we might be seeing implemented in the Biden administration under the leadership of Kamala Harris, we might see the Democratic Party move a lot left, and that's really going to affect her with suburban voters and working class voters who really did not shift back in the masses that Democrats were expecting. Now, we could be here forever talking about the backstory, what are the what-if scenarios, but I would just say that those are the two things that we might be looking at, the most critical backstories. So now let's just start by filling in the electoral map using our safe, likely, lean, and tilt characterizations for both sides, and taking a look at the states that are truly going to be deciding this presidential election in this hypothetical 2024 scenario. I also forgot to mention that the electoral map would be shifted. So I guess it would look a little off, like we're having some states like Texas now with over 41 electoral votes, and areas like the Rust Belt losing a significant amount of electoral votes. Now that we have all of that aside, let's get into it. So I would say that, of course, you're going to have your Democratic states that are always going to be safe. I would say at this point in time, you can see the West Coast, Nevada, or not Nevada, but New Mexico, Hawaii. Most of the Northeast at this time, I would say, would be safe Democratic, in addition to the state of New York and the state of Illinois. I would say at safe margins, that would be the most. Now, looking at the Republicans, with Donald Trump considering all the things I just mentioned, I would say the safe states would be kind of a similar area of what we saw the safe states in 2020 be. I mean, this 2020 election, I haven't really dig deep into these results on the channel. It's been a little bit, quite a while since I posted on the channel. We haven't been through all of that, but I will be making videos on that. But if we take a look at the 2020 results, this is generally speaking what we're looking at as our safe states. And I think by then, some states might be solidified to the point where they become safe states. I'm talking about Ohio and Iowa, that if the trends that we're continuing to see continue to evolve, we might see these states voting solidly for the Republican Party forever, and they're going to become the next Indiana. They're going to become the next South and North Dakota, who were competitive states back in 2008. But as Democrats have lost support of farmers in rural areas, it's becoming harder for them to win in areas like the Midwest. If we think about elections in the past, 2008, Barack Obama had a widespread victory in the Midwest, pretty much solely because of those rural voters that are now shifting away from the Democratic Party of AOC and the growth of the Nancy Pelosi leadership being there for 15 million years. Those two things are really affecting the Democrats' messaging, and that's going to affect them here. And if that trend continues, we might be able to see a state, I guess, like the state of Iowa and Ohio shift in that direction. I would also like to mention that in Maine, we'd probably see the first and the large district also be safe for Kamala Harris. Now, I would say this would be our starting off map. And again, I would say that truly speaking, legitimately speaking, in a best case scenario, all the Democrats would be winning the rest of these states. And I think that is very unlikely considering they would have that fatigue from being in the presidency, in the White House, and pretty much what's looking out to be a pretty boring presidency. Where really, it's looking like there might not be a lot of change. However, we are not to judge, as we have not seen what a Biden presidency looked like. Now, for Trump, I would say, again, a best case scenario where absolutely everything goes well for him. This is what we would be looking at right now. So, let's start off and start thinking about the states that I believe the Kamala Harris would carry by a margin of a likely margin. So, I think at this point in time, states like Colorado are still going to solidly be there for Kamala Harris. Those left-wing policies that have pretty much bound to be very popular in Colorado might gain her more support, and the suburbs are pretty liberal. This is one of the most liberal suburbs in the country, are the suburbs of Denver, and Denver, which has a very big population of liberal voters. I would say in addition to that, states like New Hampshire, we saw solidify for the Democratic Party, and even with a more progressive wing, this state has bound to be a very progressive state. It's going to be similar to what we're seeing in this area of the country, where, before we saw states like Rhode Island and Massachusetts vote with the Republican Party more liberal, and they still have, for example, in Massachusetts, a liberal Republican governor. They're probably going to start shifting more with the country. New Hampshire, I think Kamala Harris could carry that by at least the 5-point margin. Now, with everything else, I think maybe Virginia narrowly, we might see, I think definitely in Virginia by 2024, if the elections were held today and if today's perceptions of these two candidates were put into place in 2024, and considering the possible changes, in 2024, I expect the Democrats to lose some ground with suburbs, as we've seen with the House results. And with Biden not on the ticket, because if we think about it, the Democratic Party as a whole, they lost this election in a way. Joe Biden won this election, but looking at party-wide, who was the actual winner of this election, the Republicans made very big inroads with a lot of rural voters and a lot of suburban voters in general areas, and have made some significant gains in some cases with demographic groups. So in a state like Virginia, where the suburbs in some states that were pretty much flipped in 2018 midterms, for example, again, a candidate at a nationwide level is different at a candidate to a congressional level. But considering that Kamala Harris is probably unlikely to move that big amount of support, I think we might be able to be a little bit closer. However, I think in the state of Virginia, we would see Kamala Harris narrowly, I'm narrowly taking into the likely margin, probably 5 points. Now, as for the Republicans, we would be seeing a little bit stronger of a performance in states like Alaska, in states like Florida, in states like Ohio, in Iowa. These are states that are likely to solidify over these next 4 years for the Republican Party. And I would say it's very likely that a state like Texas might end up voting with the Republican Party by over 5% in the case that Donald Trump does get renominated. Now, I will make a video talking specifically about what the Republicans are gaining and losing if they do nominate again Donald Trump in 2024. That's actually something interesting, has a lot of things. But basically speaking, I would say that these states, Donald Trump is extremely popular. He's extremely popular in Florida. He's extremely popular in Texas, in Alaska, Iowa, Ohio. In these states, I think he's going to be able to make inroads. And with demographic groups, he's done a very good job in southern Texas. Latino vote through the sky. In South Florida, but Trump made a 15% gain in the largest county that usually used to vote Democratic by a very big margin. All these different gains that he made in the 2020 election, I think, if he runs in 2024 after 4 years of Biden and Harris governing, and probably some left-wing policies, because believe it or not, Biden's cabinet, what we know now, seems to lean a little bit more to the left, especially when it comes to spending. Usually, for example, a Treasury Secretary tends to be very conservative, both Democrats and Republicans. With Janet Yellen there, we're seeing a little bit more liberal with spending. We're seeing Neera Tanden, Office of Management and Budget, financially and I think economically, because remember, it's always the economy, stupid. That's a quote that's really come to light, and it's usually what really shifts an election is how the economy is doing. For a lot of those spending and probably increase in deficit, I think it's going to be hard for Harris to move that, and especially in these states that really care about the economy. And just considering 2020 gains in Ohio, in Iowa, and Florida, or relative gains as not losing as how much they were expected to, I think this could be a good sign for President Trump going into the future. And I would also say that Kamala Harris is most likely not going to be a very good nationwide candidate. She's inspiring in general places, but if we think about it, this election was really not... It was won because, in 2020, because it was a vote against Trump. It was not for Biden-Harris. So when we actually have a race where Donald Trump's not an incumbent, he's not taking a lot of the big crap that he's taking as he was the incumbent, I think it's going to be a very different dynamic. And with Kamala Harris not being the most exciting candidate for a nationwide race, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that ends up moving, how that ends up shifting. Okay, so those are our likely Republican states. Now, what about the Democrats? Where are they probably going to win by lean margins? I think by lean margins, we're probably taking a look at states like Minnesota, taking a look at states like Nevada, taking a look at states like Michigan. So I think overall, these are states that are probably going to end up voting Democrat for a very long time in the future. Nevada is probably going to narrow down a little bit. Again, Kamala Harris really probably could appeal to those voters, but Donald Trump really does a good job appealing to those voters, keeping those margins down. In 2020, states like Nevada and Michigan were expected to go by over 8 points. They went by around similar margins to Joe Biden of around 3%. So again, it shows that Republicans are constantly overperforming. And all those things really come into question with polling. And we're not taking a look at that in this video, but general expectations of how far left or far right some states have gone really will have an impact when it comes to future elections. And if we take a look at states like Nevada and Michigan, I think that the Democratic Party will continue to make gains. Michigan is losing population rapidly. Nevada is looking like it's going to have some economic growth over the next couple of years as they recover from the pandemic and the very big hit they had with the jobs in Las Vegas lost. So I think that's something that we're going to have to take a look at, but I think Democrats definitely can take those voters there. Now, when it pertains to the Republicans, I think states like North Carolina are still going to be somewhat narrow. However, they're still going to go to the Republican Party, in this case, Donald Trump. He has support in that state. And with the 4 years gone by, with the coronavirus pandemic, I think a lot of those things might come into realization that, maybe Donald Trump's leadership might not be as bad as they thought. Because again, a lot of these things happen in the moment. And I think when we think of the American electorate, they tend to look a lot of things in retrospect. And truly, I believe that in the next couple of years, when we see the final recovery from COVID-19, Operation Warp Speed behind them, I think we're going to be able to see, generally speaking, Americans looking back at Donald Trump and say, well, he did have some sort of character flaws, I guess, but generally how he implemented policies regarding COVID-19, it's pretty similar to what the Biden-Harris team were looking at. And if we look at her back at the 2020 campaign, what was really at stake? What were people really talking about? They were really talking about COVID-19 and how the Biden-Harris administration would make it different. So in retrospect, I think that could gain some voters there. Now, where do I think the elections are going to be the closest? Again, these two congressional districts probably going to be extremely close in a Harris versus Trump ticket election, I guess. And again, the states that we have not filled in, which would be Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona, arguably the closest states during this election. So let's start by filling in the states that Democrats, I believe, would win by lead margins, by tilt margins, or these would be very close races. So I mean, generally speaking, I think that in places like Georgia, we're going to see a very close race. If Biden does not bring the change and Kamala Harris cannot appeal and create the same excitement, I think the Republicans could carry Georgia very narrowly in 2024. When it comes to Arizona, I think it's the same thing. With Trump on the ticket, it's going to be something that's going to be interesting. But I think, again, 4 years have gone by, and 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration where a lot of things might end up happening, and truly, presidential candidates take heat. And here's the thing. Barack Obama, for example, in 2012, that was the last time we had a president reelected. He won because he had such a big electoral gap. He only lost support in some areas of the Midwest. Now, with the country being so politically unstable right now in the sense that it's essentially split 50-50, Donald Trump only lost the presidential election, truly speaking, by around a margin of 100,000 votes, if you add up the difference in the swing states that cost him the election. So with the country divided that much in half, I think it's going to be very easy to flip some votes back in states like Arizona and Georgia, giving the Republicans narrow victories. Now, when it comes to these two congressional districts, I think Harris could probably narrowly win in Nebraska. I think that Trump could probably narrowly carry Maine, 2nd congressional district. And when it comes to these two states, I think it's going to put them in the same position they were in 2020. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin deciding factors in the 2020 election. I think we're probably going to end up seeing a state like Pennsylvania probably end up voting for President Trump. In this case, because again, Kamala Harris probably does not have the same Rust Belt appeal like Joe Biden did in 2020. And I would say by then, the Democratic Party is probably going to be going significantly to the left, which at a nationwide scale, especially in those working class neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, or near Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, the word socialism and general ideas that are being pushed by pretty notable members of the Democratic Party, that is very scary for them. And I think, anecdotally, the socialism message has been a gift for the Republicans they could use in marketing. Of Donald Trump being the quote-unquote hero of socialism for many, that was how he was marketed. I think that we could see narrow victories in the Midwest for Donald Trump if he does choose to run for re-election, I guess, in 2024. And I think there's going to be, again, millions of factors that are going to come into consideration. Again, we won't really know what the real setup and real things that could happen will be, as we don't know all the events. Because remember, politics is something that is constantly changing, and 4 years is a long time. Heck, in 4 years, we don't know how the state of this country will be. So I think it's something that we really have to take a look at this with a grain of salt. But overall, I think Donald Trump might be able to win in 2024 if he does run for re-election. Again, there's going to be some overarching themes, like the voter fraud and all of that mess with the president and some of his last things in office. And with Kamala Harris, it's really just going to come down to, can she appeal to all these different groups of voters, get them excited to vote for her, and keep the moderates in check in her party? Take them in. So that's something that's going to be something interesting to see. And overall, I think this election could be really, really shifted. But I think at a national level, Kamala Harris is incapable of winning an election. So guys, that was it for this video. We will be back to doing daily videos starting today. This is our first video that we've done daily uploads. And we're going to have a very nice election night coming out for you guys extremely soon, even by tonight. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. Hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.